Hey, look at that. It's Friday already, and we love when it is here on the Morning Pit because that means it's time for the Morning Pitt Mailbag, where we take questions from you on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and answer as many as we can right here in the Friday edition of the Morning Pit, the old Morning Pit Mailbag. I always look forward to these. I hope you do as well. Before we jump into it, a little bit of news came out yesterday. Brian Hamilton, wide receiver recruit who visited last weekend, was finally announced as the final commitment. From the weekend. There were 4 commitments from the weekend, and 3 had revealed themselves, 1 had not, and Brian Hamilton was that one. It brings Pitt's recruiting class up to 19 commitments. Brian Hamilton, he's 5'10", 150 pounds, from Tampa, Florida, Gaither High School. Last year he caught 50 passes for 818 yards and 8 touchdowns, plus he returned a kickoff for a touchdown. Took an official visit to Charlotte a couple of weeks ago, at the end of May. He was supposed to visit Kansas State this coming weekend. We think that visit's canceled. We're going to get that confirmed. And then he also had offers from Arizona, Wake Forest, and Wisconsin. Another small, fast wide receiver. You guys know the type. This is what Cade Bell likes. This is what he's stocking up on, and this is what they're bringing in. They've got 4 wide receivers committed in this 2026 recruiting class. 3 out of the 4 are shorter than 6 foot. That's just what they like. Now, Jaden Dunbar, the other guy, is really big, but when you look at last year's recruits, the guys who were freshmen this year with Bryce Yates and Tony Kinsler and Cam Sapp, they're smaller guys. Sincere Lee and Raphael Williams, the transfers who came in last year, even Blue Hicks and Andy Jean, who came in this year, are kind of smaller, on the smaller side, while, of course, Deuce Spann is a bigger transfer wide receiver that they brought in. But for the most part, these are the kinds of wide receivers they've been going after. These are the kinds of wide receivers they have landed, and these are the kind of receivers that are filling out Cade Bell's offense. 19 commitments now in the class of 2026. 4 of them are wide receivers. I got to think they're pretty much filled up there, but I also can't imagine that they would turn away some of the other guys they've had in for official visits, because they've had some really good wide receiver recruits come in and take official visits. So, we'll see what they end up with numbers-wise. I think we talked about this on Wednesday night on the live show. Like we talked about, would they take a 5th wide receiver? The only reason I can see taking a 5th wide receiver is to give yourself insurance to make sure that you end up with 4 in the class, or at least 3 in the class, in case you lose 1 or 2 decommitments. I don't know if they necessarily need more than 4 wide receivers in the class, but if you take 5 commitments right now, you should be set to get at least 4 when signing day finally rolls around. But Brian Hamilton, another speedy, explosive wide receiver, he's in the class. He'll be joining Pitt in 2026. Now we'll see what comes next. This official visit weekend is going to be an interesting one, a smaller one, a quieter one. It's going to be interesting to watch. We got a lot of the details here on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, so go check that out. You see, we didn't do a full visit preview episode for this week. And so we talked about the tight ends yesterday. Quite a change from the previous 2 weeks, where our Thursday episodes were official visit previews, and yesterday was talking about how bad the tight ends have been. But, oh well, that's what happens. If you want to stay up to date on everything going on with the official visit weekend and the commitments in the recruiting class, Panther-Lair.com is the site to do so. And if you want to ask your questions, or you want to hear answers to your questions that you've been asking all week, this is the place for it. It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, Friday edition of the Morning Pit. You know what we always do? It's the mailbag episode where we get the questions from Pitt fans on Panther-Lair.com. We put out the call on Tuesday or Wednesday on the message board. Say, hey, submit your questions. You guys always come up with some great ones. It's my favorite episode of the Morning Pit every week because you guys pick the topics. I don't have to sit down and plan out the topics. You lay them out. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of research just to be prepared for some of your questions, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes we just sit down and start reading them and see what comes out. So thanks everybody who participated and contributed questions this week. It's always a lot of fun to do this. I appreciate it. Make sure while you're here, you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Let's jump into the mailbag. I don't want to waste any more time. DuBois Panther says, when the schools go back and pay the players from 2016 to 2024, will it be from the last school they attended if they transferred, or each school? So DuBois Panther is asking about the back pay component of the house settlement. You remember, there's like 3 components really to the house settlement as it relates, just of the impact that it'll have, right? There's 3 components. One is the biggest one is the revenue sharing, and it's sharing revenue each year up to whatever percentage and whatever the salary cap is set at each year, sharing that money with student athletes. And you can decide how you want to spend it and where it's going to go and all those different things. But that's the biggest component. That's the biggest out-of-pocket expense that's coming. The next, I would say, biggest component or most relevant, immediately relevant element of the relevant element. Sounds like a bad jam band. The next most relevant element of the House settlement is the roster limits. And it's not going to be scholarship limits anymore. It's going to be roster limits. You can put your entire roster on scholarship if you are so inclined. Most will not be so inclined. But if you are so inclined, you can do it. It's just you have a limit on what the rosters can be. 105 for football, 15 for basketball, so on and so forth down the line. The third component of the House settlement is the back pay. And that's money that's going to go to student athletes who played from 2016 to 2024. I have no idea how they're deciding how much each student athlete gets. I don't know how they're going to base the amount that gets paid out to each former player. But to your question of how it's decided who pays when the schools go back and pay the players, will it be from the last school they attended? No, because what's actually going to happen there, from my understanding of it, is all the schools, I think all the FBS schools, certainly all the power conference schools, are going to chip in X amount of money. I forget how much it is, a few $1 million, maybe more than a few. And they're going to chip into a pool, and then from that pool, all of the student athletes will be paid. So Pitt won't just be responsible for paying back Jordan Addison. That's a bad example, but Jordan Addison will get a cut of the money. Pitt won't be responsible just for paying back Kenny Pickett or Scott Orndorff or pick your random Pitt player since 2016, Sean Idowu. Like, Pitt won't be just responsible for paying them. Pitt will chip into a pot that's collected that will then collectively pay out to all of these student athletes. So Pitt will be paying Jordan Addison in a roundabout way. Pitt will be paying Caleb Williams in a roundabout way. Pitt will be paying Nathan Proctor in a roundabout way. Pooh to Pitt. It'll actually finally go from Pitt to Pooh. Pick your random name. Over the years, like, they're all going to get money out of this pot if they're part of the class or whatever it is. My legalese is not the most detailed, and my knowledge of this is not the most detailed, but that's how I understand that. Everybody's going to kick into a pot, and then from that pot, all the student athletes from 2016 to 24 will be paid out in some way, shape, or form. Some fashion. Someone will decide how much each student athlete that wants to be part of it is worth. So that's how that works. So Pitt won't just be responsible for its own players. Everybody will be responsible for everybody. It takes a village to pay a student athlete. TPFKA_JD says, what underrated WPIAL 2026 recruit going to Pitt will outperform higher rated kids who went elsewhere? That's an interesting question. Right now, Pitt has, they have 2 WPIAL commitments. Why am I drawing a blank on this? I know they have Lincoln Hoke and Reston Lehman. Is there one more that I'm forgetting? Oh, and John Coran. Outperform guys who are higher rated going elsewhere. Let me look up the player rankings, and we'll sort it by state, and we'll see what, who we would compare this to as far as comparable players who could outperform. Looking at the 24/7 rankings, Matt Sieg from Fort Cherry going to Penn State. He'll be a safety there as the top-ranked guy in Western PA, the top WPIAL guy. Jay Timmons from Pine Richland is next. He's going to Indiana. David Davis going to Penn State is after that. He's going to he's from Imani Christian. He's going to Penn State. Ashton Black going to North Carolina. Keyshawn Robinson comes next. He hasn't committed anywhere yet. So kind of waiting on that one. And then comes Reston Lehman. It's hard to say like who's going to outperform other guys because I think you want to compare like by position, right? And so Reston Lehman comes next. There's not another defensive end ranked higher than him in the WPIAL. Same thing with like Lincoln Hoke. There's not another defensive tackle I see Let me just scroll down here and see if there's another defensive tackle who's ranked higher than, another defensive tackle from the WPIAL who's ranked higher than Lincoln Hoke. I don't think there is. And so, it's tough to compare there. And then, John Curran, I'm looking at offensive linemen in the WPIAL, and I can't really find any. So, it's hard to say. I mean, but if you want to say overall, like who's going to outperform, guys who are going, higher ranked guys who are going elsewhere, I don't know. I mean, I think Matt Zeeks is really good. I think Jay Timmons is really good. I think I'll be interested to see what David Davis becomes, what position he plays at Penn State, and kind of how he does up there. But it's hard for me to compare, Reston Lehman outperformed David Davis. They play different positions. Am I going to compare John Curran from Pine Richland with David Davis? When Davis is a defensive back and Curran is an offensive lineman. So that's tricky. I think they got 3 good players from the WPIAL in Curran and Hoke and Lehman. I think they did well there. It would have been nice if they could have gotten Lucas Shanafelt or Colson Gatton. Those two would have been, one or both of those two would have been a pretty nice add to this class. But, overall, I think they got 3 good prospects from Western PA, 3 good WPIAL kids. And I think they're going to, I think they'll do well. But we'll see. It's tough to compare though to higher rated guys at different positions. If they were the same position, then we could say, Lehman should be rated higher than this other defensive end, but they're not. Left Coast Panther says, who is next in line to replace Ben Sauls? What little I followed this spring, I seem to recall a kicker not looking all that great. Yeah, James London, the transfer who came in from Murray State, is the next guy in line. He was brought in as a transfer. He was brought in to be the next kicker. He was brought in to fill that hole left by Ben Sauls. And no, he didn't look great in the spring. He missed some kicks in the spring game, and kind of throughout spring camp, you heard that he wasn't looking all that hot. Ben Sauls was really, really good. They are going to lose something and miss something without Ben Sauls. I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't think it's one of these cases where you don't appreciate it till it's gone. I think Pitt fans appreciated Ben Sauls when he was here, and I think Pitt fans are very concerned about replacing him. Even before they saw, James London in the Blue Gold game or heard about him in spring camp, I think they were concerned about how Pitt was going to replace Ben Sauls because he was really good and an asset for a team that could find itself in close games if their defense plays well, but the offense, has its ups and downs. Could come down to field goals. That could be the difference in the game. And when you don't have a reliable kicker like Ben Sauls, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. You're putting those wins in jeopardy. And that's going to be a tricky situation. I don't know what to expect out of James London. I really don't. Like I say, the reviews out of spring camp weren't great. I think there might even be a competition there. But we'll see. We'll see. I think he has plenty of time to get right. I think he was a good kicker at Murray State. So, I don't have any reason to believe that he's just completely doomed or something like that. But he's going to have to improve and get a lot better by the time the season starts because Pitt's going to need him, and they're going to be counting on him. Diehard Panther says, will Pat Narduzzi add any more transfers to this year's roster, and who are they? I don't think so. This question was asked last week, a week ago, actually, last Thursday, and maybe it felt like the window was still open there. The window technically is still open. You could still, add more transfers if you're so inclined. I don't see them doing that. I don't think there's on one hand, I was going to say, I don't think there's a huge need, but even if there was a huge need, I don't think you're going to find a guy who fills a huge need on June 20th, of 2000, with the season starting in less than 2 months or, less than 3 months or whatever it is. So even if there was another guy to bring in, I'm not sure they would make much of an impact. It might be one of these walk-on special teams guys or something like that. I think the roster is mostly set. I think, who you're going to be counting on. The players who are important. The guys that it'll come down to. I don't see any other transfer additions or any real need for transfer additions. They have their team. My team is on the field, right? My team is on the field. Litchfield Tower A says, did you ever manage to get the inside story on the comically large hat Bernowski was wearing in all the official visit pictures? No, I have no idea what the story is. I should have brought one of the photos up and put it in the slideshow there, because a bunch of the recruits have it on in their photos too. And I don't know why. I don't know why it became a thing this year. I don't know why Bernowski was wearing it. I don't know why the players were wearing it. I guess they think it's cool. I have no idea. I don't know. Does Pitt sell these comically large, oversized hats on their website or something? Is this a new marketing ploy? Are people going to be at the games wearing comically large, oversized hats? Probably not. It would obstruct other people's views. And since we already have fans who get yelled at about standing up, either yelled at by other fans or yelled at by ushers, I can't think that a comically large, oversized hat is going to be approved. Like a Turd Ferguson 10-gallon hat type of thing. I don't think you're allowed to wear that. I wonder if the Pitt Pope, he wears a hat, right? I wonder if he ever gets yelled at for having that hat on. Although he's in the student section and they stand the whole time. So there wouldn't be an issue because, you're standing. You're not your hat's not blocking the view of someone sitting behind you. But, you can't really put up umbrellas during a game, or at least you're not supposed to, I don't think. I can't think that you would be allowed to wear a comically large, oversized hat, But maybe. Who knows? Maybe you'll see them for sale. I don't get it. But I didn't get it when they started having lightsabers in these recruit visit slideshows. So I'm an old man yelling at the sky here, and because I don't understand comically large, oversized hats. Jay Lazinger says, I realize almost all this has to do with how the season goes, but do you have any sense if Eli Holstein would leave for the NFL if he has a monster year? I really feel like he's being undersold. He was on pace for 22 passing touchdowns last year if he played all of the games. I mean, look, Eli Holstein will be eligible to go. This is his third year of college football. If he has, as you say, quote, a monster year, then yeah, I think it's on the table for him to go. But then you followed up and say he was on pace for 22 touchdowns. And is 22 touchdowns a monster year? Even in a 12-game schedule, let alone a 13-game schedule. I don't know if 22 touchdowns is getting anybody drafted. I would think a monster year needs to be 35, 40 touchdowns. The kind of, I would think the kind of year that's going to get you to think about going out in the draft after 3 years, after just 2 years as a starter, regardless of what the draft class looks like. I have no idea what the 2026 quarterback draft class is supposed to look like, but regardless of what the class looks like, I think you got to actually have a monster year for that to be under consideration. And I'm talking 35, 40 touchdowns, a big year. 22 touchdowns should not compel you to leave for the NFL. It really shouldn't. Now, I'm kind of on board with you saying Eli Holstein's being undersold. I think he was really good. There were points last year where he looked like a big-time quarterback who could get Pitt to the next level, whatever that means. There were points where he looked like he could put the team on his back and win games almost single-handedly. Now, some of that was getting the ball to Desmond Reed and letting Reed make plays. Some of that was getting the ball to Konate Mumfield and letting him make plays. But a lot of it was Eli Holstein being really good. Running around, keeping plays alive, making throws downfield, making sharp throws, accurate throws, good reads, and all those different things. That wasn't the whole season. Even when he was playing, he had plenty of downs among all of those ups. But those ups were really impressive. And if he could turn those ups that maybe it was 50-50, 50% ups, 50% downs last season. That's just sort of off the top of my head. But if he could turn that into 75% ups, 80% ups, 85% ups, Pitt should win a lot of games, and he should be talked about as an NFL draft prospect. But then there's other guys on the roster, and Eli Holstein, by all accounts, didn't have a great spring. He needs to have a much better August, or else some of these guys, Mason Heinschel and Cole Gonzalez, are going to be breathing down his neck and putting the pressure on to win the job. So there's a lot of ways it could go for Eli Holstein this year. I do think he maybe is being undersold a little bit just because he was really good last year, but we heard not as great, reports out of spring camp, and it's been a long time since he was really good, right? The start of a drive against Louisville until they got into the red zone and he threw a pick in the end zone. I think When before that? Was he really good? When was when were his other best moments? You have to go back pretty far. It feels like a long time ago. So I don't know. I go back and forth on what I think Eli Holstein is capable of this year. If he's at his best, if he takes those moments from last year and turns them into more consistent, sustained efforts and performances, he can be really good and Pitt will be really good. And there will be talk about him being an NFL draft prospect. 22 touchdowns, not going to cut it. Can't have games like he had against Cal. Can't play like he did in the first 40 minutes against Cincinnati. He can't play like Syracuse game is a tough one because he didn't really need to do anything, but you got to be better than that if you really want to be in that consideration. And if he is better than that and he plays at that high level, then sure, I think it's something he'll look at and consider for sure. All right, great questions. We got a few left over that we will use for next week. I always like to do that, like to save a few, especially when we get past that 20-minute mark, and we've had great questions already, which was the case today. So thanks everybody who submitted questions and participated in the mailbag this week. We appreciate it for sure. If you want to get your question in next week, go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, look for the mailbag thread, post your question in there, and we'll answer as many as we can in the mailbag next week. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And I think that's about it. Thanks so much for tuning into the videos this week. I hope you had a great week. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Keep it tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all the official visit news, and we will catch up with you on Monday morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.